Hey, it's Sarah Jane, and I have just wanted to pop in here today because it is Father's Day, and I've had a full house, some beautiful people sharing the day, celebrating fathers that have lived well and died well, and those that are still growing, children, and just watching the love between fathers and daughters. And there's a little bit of melancholy that came up for me because my father has been gone for almost 5 years now, and we didn't have a great relationship. It was one of those that was, I love you, I hate you, I distrust you, I adore you, I want your attention, I'm never enough, I can't be enough. There was some idolatry, there was some huge judgment, but ultimately he was my father, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. And I know that if you're a woman and you're listening to this, what a difference a day makes if you can hear the music playing in the background. You know, it's 24 hours and it's about being present and knowing that everything is actually temporary. And for my father, we always used to kind of joke because he was a Sagittarian living in a home with 5 women. 4 of them were Geminis, and one of my sisters is a Leo, who's pay me attention, no, don't look at me, don't look at me. And anyone who knows Sagittarians, it's the sign in the 9th house, and it's all about the hero and the villain. And you know, he was a people's person. He loved an audience. He was a great storyteller, and you know, we're always kind of looking for the happily ever after. And he was that kind of man that you either loved or you hated. I remember many a night my father got himself into trouble and being hauled in the car, and my mother going to rescue him from a bar fight with his teeth in his hand, and you know, pushing his teeth back in his mouth because he was tempestuous, and he was also a 3rd generation alcoholic. So it came from a family of men that were deeply depressed on some level. You know, there were a lot of skeletons in the cupboard and a lot of things that he was ashamed of in his family legacy. And he was basically an impetuous, is that a word? Impetuous? He was a show-off. And as long as he had an audience and he could tell a good story, he was a happy man. And then he'd come home to a house full of women that all wanted his attention, and we all spoke different love languages. And I think there was a lot of misunderstanding in our family with my father. Hi Christina, nice to see you. So I just wanted to kind of give tribute and appreciation for my father, who is my father, regardless, right or wrong, good or bad. He was my father, and he taught me the best that he could to be a good woman. And I spent a bit of time today on my own in a full house, wondering what my father would make of all of this. You know, what he would think of the people that loved him and the people that adored him and the people that he shared his life with and told his stories to. And the whole energy of the patriarch and the father energy, and how to just soften these men, that they can sort of tap into the warrior energy of themselves and be the best that they can be, and to just know that at the end of the day all we have is the present, and whether we choose to love them or hate them, part of the Father is within us. It's the desire of the Father. And there's this thing that under all of the chaos, all of the things that seem really exciting, the things that seem very tragic, all of the stories and the labels and the hurt, actually, because there's a lot of hurt with my dad, but all the limitations, all the goals, all the things that he showed up as, they were temporary, just as I'm temporary right now speaking to you. I'll never have this moment again, but there are things that we chase and attach to and totally forget that this is it. Everything you think you've ever earned or have or created in your life, it's going to be gone. And I know it may sound very morbid or depressing or horrifying, but it only sounds horrifying to the part of you that knows that it's going to also be gone. And it sounds horrifying to a story that has been created from attaching to all these things. So, you know, just sit with that for a little bit. If you just know that deep down inside of you that there's this calm, never ever changing place. It's a constant that exists deep down inside of you, and that's available for you to connect to at any time. It's there all the time, but most people, I mean, I do it all the time. I connect to the things and they always go away. You know, it's kind of like trying to connect to a wave, you know, thinking you're separate to the ocean, but you're just a wave, and eventually it's going to wash up on the shore and it's going to dump the stuff that it's picked up, but it'll still be part of the ocean. But if you're making yourself separate to the ocean, you're creating from a place of attachment. And I am of desire. I am of my father as much as I am of my mother. And that's the place that so many people connect and attach to and suffer. And it doesn't mean that you don't have to have those things that were great, but if you make that attachment to those things first, to the story, and you make that story bigger than you, well, you know, then you're stuck with it, and there is no way, because you're attached to it. Has to keep getting better, and you're going to find yourself that if you're under the illusion of that thing and that story of who your father should have been or what he wasn't, he can never just be the love of doing the best that he could, and you're always going to create a space where that thing is going to go away, and you're going to be horrified at that, and you're going to spend every waking moment doing everything you possibly can to manipulate and keep it or trick it or dream it into being and manipulate and lie to make it something that it wasn't, instead of just loving what it is and loving what arises in your feelings towards the father or your father or the desire, the God, the divine. And just like our hair falls out or our hair grows and our nails grow and we cut it, can you imagine how it could be if you thought who you were was the current nail growing on your nail, or the hair that fell on the floor when you had a haircut? And you think you're not enough because now that hair's gone, or that nail's gone, or that tooth fell out, and you think you have to start all over again. And then when the hair grows, then you have to become that identity, when you forget that it's going to fall out, just like our eyelashes falls out and a new one comes. But you're holding on to this attachment of that I'm the hair or the eyelash or the tooth or the skin that you're in. And this is what we do with things that we're in, that we seem to forget that we're temporary in the moment of being with it in relationship, that it's just temporary. It's a fleeting moment of 24 hours or 10 seconds. And you know, it's not your fault. We were brought up in this training of the fairy tale of, and you know, Cinderella and the prince went off and lived happily ever after, but nobody ever tells you what happened after the after, where maybe Cinderella cried because she thought she needed the prince, and the prince cried because he thought he needed Cinderella, And when they were gone, they were horrified when one left or one died, that they didn't know who they were without the prince or without Cinderella, and they stopped suffering eventually because they undo the story, which is the grieving of really loving deep down what you are, because you create your happily ever after. You know, you are your happily ever after, because happiness is a choice, and loving your father or hating your father or being a daddy's girl or not being a daddy's girl is your choice. So the good news underneath all of the story is that if you're suffering, you're in the identity of that, you know that you're afraid of losing something, or you're stuck in your story. And the good news is that what you think you are, or who you think your father is just a story. The good news is it's just temporary. The good news is that the things that you're letting go of are just temporary. And the good news is that the things that you think that you are and the things that you think that you have are going to go away, so that part of you goes away, so that you can meet you in your heart more every single minute of being. There's no bad news in living in the present. You can't lose yourself, and you can't. Here's the thing, when you lose something that your story says you're not supposed to be with, you're still in that still point of pushing pause, meeting yourself a little bit deeper. And as I said, I lost my father 5 years ago, and there was only joy when he left, because he didn't have a suffering. He didn't hold on. He was here and then he wasn't. Hi, Matthew. But there wasn't never this expectation that my father needed to be here any longer than he was, and I didn't have to be with him until he was in his 80s or his 90s. I didn't, you know, it was so funny because I remember he was a big famous rugby player, and he lived for the sport. You know, in the old days, in the 60s, when he was the villainous and the hero of rugby, he was a hooker. He played for the Springboks. I remember him telling me this story, because he was a great storyteller, telling me how he had to borrow a coat from one of my mother's Jewish ancestral family members, because he didn't own a coat and a hat. And in those days they went along on a ship that took 3 months to get to London, where they were playing the Lions, on a field where there was no sponsorship. They played for the love of the sport. But I remember him telling me the story of how difficult it was, because there was this shame of not being enough, because he came from a family that didn't have a lot. And I think a lot of what my father's alcoholism was that he was deeply depressed. He never got to resolve some of this ancestral trauma, this hereditary trauma that was carried from one generation to the other with him. But he got on that ship in his borrowed coat and his borrowed hat, and he looked divine. And I've seen photographs of him with Zaza Gabor and the Can women in Paris, and he had a wonderful time. And he always remembered that story, and he also came back from that trip with, I think my sisters were maybe 5 and 3 at the time, and he'd been away for a really, really long time. And he came back, and he had to then start to try and fit into this role of being the person everybody wants to be. He was a Sagittarian. He was the person everybody loved, but he was this Jekyll and Hyde. The only place he could feel safe of, which I only realized after very late in his life, when we healed and I forgave him, and I had a good heart-to-heart with my father after cutting him out of my life for a very long time. And I'm so grateful that I got to be brave enough to do that, because he got to know my sister's children, and he got to have his family back. And it was the most wonderful thing to be able to sit around a table on Father's Day, which was a little bit of the aching in my heart today. I don't want to say it was sadness. It was a celebration of, I'm so glad I had that time with my father, where he sat with my sisters and my mother and his current lover, who was the most beautiful woman. I'm so grateful for her. But we could sit around a table, and there was so much love around that table. And if I hadn't softened my heart, if I hadn't managed to go deep down and change that thing 10 degrees, my sisters wouldn't have known my father at the end of his life, and their children wouldn't have known my father at the end of his life. Hi, Sarah Jane. I'm so grateful that whatever that was in that present moment, I got to change something, and I got to know my father, and I got to forgive him, and he got to have a good life, and he got to feel the love that he never thought he was worthy of. And when it came to him checking out, he got to choose how he checked out, and it wasn't long, and he didn't suffer. It was quick, and he left. And he taught me in that moment. I never forget, I was in Mauritius at the time with my daughter and my husband, when Fiona, the most beautiful woman, I call her my second mother, called me, and she said, Sarah Jane, he's gone. And I was like, thank you for being in his life, thank you for loving him. Thank you for loving him with all his flaws and all his faults. Thank you for loving him. And it was a bittersweet moment where we got to really appreciate my father for being imperfect and fucked up and doing the best that he could with what he had, because he didn't know any better. And you know, here's the thing, your soul doesn't give a shit, actually, about convenience. There's never going to be a right moment to say, sorry, I screwed up. There's never going to be a right moment to ask for what you need in the name of the Father, in the name of Spirit, in the name of you, in the name of love. There's never going to be a good time or the right time. There's only the now, and there's only the present moment, and your spirit cares about alignment. And when you're aligned, you're gonna see it doesn't feel convenient. It doesn't feel lovey and mushy and happily ever after to your ego. It doesn't, because everything is temporary, and all you have is now. All you have is the present moment. And my father taught me to live in the now, because he really was a man that lived in the now, and he really, really had a wonderful sense of humor, and he made people laugh. And he also hurt the people that loved him the most. But I get it now. I get that that was his safe place. That was a place where he did not have to be the person that everybody wanted to be, the big rugby star, you know, the one that was famous and glorified and adored and idolized. When he came home, he could let all that go, and he could just be. And I get it. I get that my mother held that container for him to let the shadow come out. And was it fun growing up like that? Absolutely not. Treading on eggshells is not fun. But I wouldn't be doing the work that I do now if it wasn't for my dad. Hi, Patricia. I can see you in this moment, you know. It's just like there's not a day that it was a given to me that my father would leave when he left. But there's a lot coming out of my tears tonight during the day. And yes, I think of a lot of stories and a lot of memories in my past that all included my father, and they weren't great memories, but they were good ones. And I'll never experience any of those with him ever again. And I have this belief that there's a future, you know, and not just now, but if I feel like I find my mind trying to grab onto the supposed to, You know, where's my father now? You know, and it falls over. And I'm like, well, why did he leave so soon when there is so much to live for still? And I cry, and I feel more centered and more connected to what my father really is for me and what he stood for. Because he didn't die. His story died. His body died. But I know that he's right here. Sometimes I see him in my cats. Sometimes I see him in my daughter. Sometimes I see him in my current partner. And I can see that even though my father's body was always changing, and he had the worst bow legs I could ever imagine from all his scrumming days. He was a hooker. He had the most terrible bow legs, and we tried to get him a knee up. We tried to get the South African Springbok Rugby Union to pay for it, and they weren't interested. Thank you, Christina. Cry tears of joy and love. And that, you know, my body's changing all the time. We're never the same from 10 seconds increment to the next. We're never the same. Our cells are changing. The space in between is constantly dying and rebirthing and regenerating and dying all the time. So my father is completely here, right here with me, in my child, in my sisters, in my mother. He's alive every day. He's right here. He lives in of the Father. And the only thing that died was my attachment, was the temporary, was the suffering, actually. And a lot of opinions that I had about my father, and the judgments that I had about him, and the expectations, what he should have been, and what made him good or what made him a bad father. Hi, Alison. You know, there was so much. So I hope you feel what I'm feeling right now in your body, and I hope that me coming to you tonight after a birthday celebration, beautiful food, and a beautiful space of watching young women love their fathers as only a child can. All we have is the present moment, and we have to make those moments count. And you start, Christina, by loving whatever arises in the feelings that you have toward yourself in regard to those expectations and those judgments and those places where you think your father broke your heart. He didn't. He broke your expectations. And you start by taking a step, by taking a breath, by loving yourself for all the thoughts and feelings and expectations and rejections and projections that you have about you toward your father and your father toward you. And you take a breath and you soften your heart and you do the best that you can, and you just remember that they did the best they could with what they had, and that by you stepping up and loving those parts of you that can't love or are loving or have seen abuse as love, that actually wasn't love, it was abuse, you get to soften your heart and you get to go deep down and you get to change your legacy. You get to change this for generations to come, because you are the ancestor of the people that are going to come after you. And you get to thank the Father, the great Father, your father, and all the fathers that lived before you and came before your father and lived well or did not live well, and died well and did not die well. The ones that suffered, the ones that succeeded, the ones that created, and the ones that destroyed. You get to love all of it, and you get to be in that space of loving yourself enough to change it along that epigenetic line. You just get to love whatever arises, and you get to soften, and you get to know that in this moment I am feeling this way about my father, and I love that. good, bad, right, wrong, whatever it is, it's temporary. And your presence, your willingness and your demand to live in the now and to just appreciate the Father energy, the great Father, like the big self and the little self, the big soul and the little soul. You're bigger than your story. You're bigger than your story about your Father, and you're bigger than the story about your Father. Father, because you are of desire. You are of the Father as you are of the Mother. You are the Pachamama, you are the earth, you are the metal, you are the water, you are life itself. And when we can tap into the desire of knowing what we want, we change that, and it has this beautiful ripple effect that goes out and touches other people's hearts. And we get to heal this great separation sickness together, because it doesn't necessarily have to take years of work. It just has to take awareness and honoring the awareness of where you are and who you are. And I want to reiterate, this doesn't mean that you don't enjoy the things on this planet that are temporary. Enjoy them to the death of them. You do not need to live in a cave or live on air. But if you bring you into this moment and into these things and into the Father and the Mother that lives within you, you start to be less attached and less needy, and you start to really enjoy. You bring it in, and then you realize you don't need anything, and you get to enjoy you, and you get to bring you into the world. So just start out by knowing what's really you and what's really true and what's really eternal, and then everything else is just the cherry on the top, right? It's just, I am having my cake and I am eating it too, just maybe not all at the same time. And then we get to really love where we are and where we land, moment by moment. Inch by inch is a cinch, yard by yard is hard. So happy Soul Sunday, wherever you are. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers that lived well and died well, and for all those that are becoming the Father, of the Father, of knowing what you want and knowing you're unstoppable when you realize that you are you. You are love itself in a body, and the only thing that's in your way is your desire or lack of. It's stopping you. So cheers. Happy Father's Day wherever you are. I'll leave some to the angel. I love you, Dad. Bye.